at all, okay? You talking this dude that did some sick, twisted things to my little sis, okay? And you want to put me face to face with this dude, okay?
In prison, there is no creature lower than a child sexual offender. Even snitches get a pass before these guys. CSOs, chomos, pedophiles, the nicknames all mean the same thing, and they help average convicts differentiate themselves from those they like to believe are the real monsters. A report from the Associated Press suggests inmates in the prison system are getting killed at twice the average, with child molesters disproportionately likely to meet their demise inside, which is awful, but not too surprising given how much hatred is directed at those inmates. But why would this crime stand out so much from the rest? In the social hierarchy of prison inmates, mob kingpins, accomplished bank robbers, and cop killers tend to get the most respect. Convicts who have committed crimes against children, especially sexual abuse, are hated, harassed, and abused. Many inmates refer to molesters as dirty prisoners, and some insist that assaulting or killing them represents a service to society. Prisoners use a couple of tricks to identify dirty inmates. They may ask new arrivals for their jacket, which refers to the paperwork, including information on laws violated, that some states issue to each prisoner. In the absence of such documentation, the inmates rely on rumors or occasional clues. Transfers from other prisons who arrive with signs of physical trauma, for example, are frequently suspected of being dirty, according to inmate accounts. Correctional officers sometimes mention that the transfer was marked at his old facility, meaning there was a hit put on him. When individuals find themselves incarcerated, it is a general rule not to publicize their wrongdoings, unless they want to invite trouble from fellow inmates. However, certain crimes carry a stigma so severe that they become a magnet for hostility and violence. One such crime is child molestation. In contrast to ex-cops, who must work hard to prove they are not malicious, sex offenders are highly likely to be exposed. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, approximately 11.6% of federal inmates are incarcerated for sexual offenses. This number not only includes child molesters, but also those involved in obscenity or child prostitution. When child molesters walk into prison, their life hangs in the balance of anonymity and security level. You may think higher security means higher protection, but it's the other way around. A higher security level means more hardened criminals like murderers and racists, which ultimately leads to a worse experience. They can feel safe inside a low-security federal prison that has a dormitory housing and non-violent inmates. But if an inmate admits to being a sex offender, they're typically checked in. This means that they must go into protective custody for the sake of not getting attacked by fellow inmates. There have been countless stories about sex offenders getting harassed, attacked, and brutalized as part of the institutional culture. If they can't get protective custody, they have to force their way into long-term solitary confinements. Another safe place is the rougher yards. If they don't check in there, they're sometimes beaten off a yard. Whether it's in the chow hall or in front of the lieutenant's office, prisoners knock the sex offender to the ground and stomp them in the prison guard's view to avoid being the next David Bob or Louis Conti. First things first, don't brag. There's nothing to be proud of here. Keeping a low profile is important, and there's no need to needlessly carry a fake alias because some prisoners can get background checks pulled and can verify. Let's now take you through some of the worst deaths reported in prisons of child molesters and sex offenders. A court has heard how the man dubbed Britain's worst pedophile was tortured and killed in prison by a fellow inmate who wanted him to feel what all those children felt. Huckle had been serving 22 life sentences for the abuse of nearly 200 children between the ages of 6 months and 12 years when was allegedly killed in cold blood by Fitzgerald. Hull Crown Court heard that Fitzgerald, 30, set upon Huckle, 33, in a prolonged attack designed to humiliate and degrade the pedophile at Full Sutton Prison in October last year, 3 years after he was jailed for life for sexually abusing scores of children in Cambodia and Malaysia. According to The Sun, Fitzgerald told the prison's mental health team that he murdered Mr. Huckle in cold blood and would like to have cooked bits of his body in an attack that he described as poetic justice. The court heard how Fitzgerald used an electric cable to strangle Huckle before forcefully inserting a pen into his brain. Huckle was found gagged and bound by his hands and feet with severe injuries to his face and with an incision made on his neck from a shank made with a melted toothbrush. Prosecutor Alistair MacDonald QC said the injuries to the predatory pedophile showed a form of punishment associated with his crimes. In January, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation said they were investigating the deaths of 48-year-old David and 62-year-old Luis Conti after Watson attacked them, causing head wounds. Both were serving life sentences with the possibility of parole for aggravated sexual assault of a child under 14 years old, the department said. Watson, who was convicted of murder in 2009, sent his confession to the Bay Area News Group. In his letter, Watson said he beat the convicted child molesters with a cane in January. He claimed that he warned prison officials before the attack. Watson was recently moved to the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility and State Prison in Corcoran and was given a lower-level security classification. He went from level 3 to level 2 security, which meant he could be transferred from a single-person cell to dorm-style living, he wrote in his letter. Watson, however, called the transfer a careless mistake and said a child molester eventually moved into his pod. The inmate, who Watson identified as Molester 11, watched PBS Kids in full view of other inmates, which Watson viewed as a taunt, according to the news outlet. He claims he told a prison counselor that he wanted to be moved back to level 3 security, but he was scoffed at. I was mulling it all over when along came Molester number 1, and he put his TV right on PBS Kids again, he wrote. But this time someone else said something to the effect of, "Is this guy really going to watch this right in front of us?" And I recall saying, "I got this," and I picked up the cane and went to work on him. Watson then went to find a guard and confess, but something stopped him along the way. As he got to the lower tier, he saw a well-known child trafficker, and according to him, figured he'd just do everybody a favor. Sanderson, a 79-year-old, was killed at a Century Correctional Institute in Florida. Sanderson was serving 2 life sentences for his crimes at the time, with prison officials yet to say more about how he was killed or who was responsible for his murder. Police and prison investigators are now probing Sanderson's killing. Speaking at the hearing where Sanderson was convicted in October 2016, his wife Charlotte said the pedophile had fled to Nicaragua for 4 years because he was terrified of losing his life behind bars. The mistreatment of molesters in prison, however, is often exaggerated. Despite a handful of high-profile murders, like those of Jeffrey Dahmer and Father John Giogan, relatively few child molesters are killed. California sends about 1,300 people to jail every year for sexual abuse of a minor. Only 11 people die annually from assaults in California prisons, and few of them are convicted molesters. Criminologists say that many child molesters assimilate into prison society perfectly well, even if their fellow inmates know what they did. It's often a question of making friends in the right gang, usually based on your race or which county you're from, and relying on their protection.